Okay, so now we're going to add in the trees in the ecosystem layer. So for this, what we're going to do is go to the material, and I'm going to load a layer, or actually we'll go to add layer. It's going to give us a blank layer. Now this is going to adjust the scale a little. We've got the initial scale set to 1. And it looks like it's not allowing me to change that scale, which is weird. Whether or not we want to control the overall scale or the individual material, we could set either of these to 10 and then set the initial scale to 1 if we want to work with each individual material that way. But I think I'm going to do an overall scaling because we're going to be copying and pasting. So I'm going to set these values to 1. It is working now. The new layer, what we need to do is grab some stuff from the material below. So let's go ahead and call this Farmland color. And this we're going to change over to ecosystem material. So now we're seeing just the underlying material, and now we have equal scale. This is going to be important. Also, too, if you end up randomizing it, you're going to have to make sure that the seed levels remain the same. Unfortunately, we can't really link the seeds directly because we can't use external dependencies outputting from the material. We could use an object graph and connect it that way, but it's going to be more work than is really necessary. So what we want now is those lines that we had as part of that Blender on input 1. So this setup here, so I'm going to go ahead and just select these and copy, and hopefully we can paste them over onto the alpha. Could edit alpha, paste, there we go. This needs to go onto the position. And just so we can see everything properly, I'm going to change preview options and match them up to what we have with the other nodes, which is 1 kilometer in the preview here. There we go. Now we can see them. We got our lines. Now we don't need the color for this. We just need the filter node output. Connect that to our alpha. And alphas work in reverse in view. So lower value 1, upper -1. And let's go ahead and just try this out. We're going to use just some basic trees because I'm going to have them pretty small. We'll do a maple tree, and then I'll do plum tree, which is a lot smaller, so I will go ahead and increase the scale of that a little so that we don't have too many of them. And let's go ahead, let's see how large this terrain is. It's quite large. 15 kilometers, so it's going to be a lot of trees. Let's go ahead and change it. I'm going to do the fast population mode and see if that works with the alpha. Actually, we do have, this is set to object parametric for that. I just want to work with a smaller area right now, so what I'm going to do is just scale this down while we work on the ecosystem. It's 1 kilometer, and I can scale it back up. A little larger, just to take out a chunk of it. and we can work on fine details. And then I'm going to go ahead and increase the scale of the terrain too, so that it reflects the scale it was before. It's going to be a little off with the Y, but right now we're just focusing on the ecosystem, so I will change that back later. So now we just kind of have a flat surface, but it's smaller, and we'll be able to populate the ecosystem a little quicker, to modify it, adjust the scale, just to get an idea for the alpha, so we don't have to over and over keep populating it. And it's showing up fairly well. I was saying before, it's not going to be perfect because of the way we have to generate these lines. And we might even need to go into the function and pull out some of the lower level areas a little more. Let's go ahead and take a look at those trees. We've got a nice small tree line. Yeah, that scale looks like it should be okay. And then we will end up using dynamic population for the larger areas. But if we need to, and I'm not sure if fast population mode works with the alpha. It looks like it does. Some of those features won't work in fast population mode. But if we take a look, what I want to make sure is that we're getting some of these little values. So what I want to do is go into the filter and bring that in more. It should pull out those lines, and as long as that middle one stays on 0, we should be able to bring these pretty close together and cut them out. I'm just going to clip the outer range values just in case we're going outside of bounds. Increase the size of the plum tree a little. I'm also going to change this over to billboard shaded, since the shaded billboard mode doesn't reflect the scale very well. And here we can see that cutout there. And because we're not filling in all of the areas and we're not getting every little bit over a larger scale, and I'm sure if we moved to different portions of the vector, if we were to adjust the seed and randomize it a little, we would probably find a better area. In this section here, we don't have any outlines in this portion. So what we might want to do to make it look a little better is maybe add in those paths, which might show up in the material even if they don't show up for the ecosystem. I'm going to go ahead and adjust the density of the ecosystem just a little, bring it down so there's not so many trees. And then what we can do for the farmland color is let's get those paths on there. Or at least try to. We did edit that filter before, so I'm just going to do the same thing for the color. And then we'll take that, and we can use this to create a blender, which we already have right here, so we might as well just reuse that and mix together a color variation. So go to color, and let's do just a color variation, I guess will work. And let's do a lighter color. Maybe make it a little darker for our paths. and that will become input 1, and then what we'll do is control the ratio with this, making sure we clip the out of range values. And can't quite tell if that's adding it in or not. Let's go ahead and change this to 0 to 1, since that is our control value is 0 to 1. Oh, and that's because this is a color map, and that's why that's not showing. Because I need to bypass the color map, because otherwise what we're doing is actually using the alpha output of the color when we actually need the controller for the color. There we go. Just wondering why that wasn't working. And that should be good. We'll go ahead and clip the out of range values so we're not getting any weird colors showing up. And then if we want, we can go back and adjust the scale. And get those paths in there. Now if we take a look, we see that the color is still, since it's still part of that main layer, we have those row bumps going over that color, which we really don't want. So the better thing to do is just exactly what we did with the material for the ecosystem layer, and just create and use an alpha, and use that as an alpha like we did with the ecosystem on another material layer. So for now, I'm just going to delete that. We'll go back to what we had before. And like I said, I don't want to lose this if I was to close it out, because sometimes that can happen. We'll just set our ratio, make sure it's on the green there. Go ahead and add a new layer. And then we'll load in, oh, not a color production, we'll load in a material. And let's just grab something a little lighter. And I'm just going to use grass variations, which might have an alpha on it, and then I'm just going to change the color to more of a brown, which you might need to do in the function itself because the color variation is based on that color map. So just use a brown. Maybe turn down the roughness so it's not so speckled. It might be the scale and stuff too. Color variation there, that's being caused by that. Extra roughness there. Okay, so now we need to make sure that the scale is set the same, which it is. I'm going to set our alpha boost to 0, and then go back into here. And we just need these nodes up on top that are part of the clumps. Go to that grass variation, reset that color since it's changing it now. Paste that in. Connect to position. And then set our alpha to 1 and -1 because we have to reverse it. And now it's adding it to there. So now we can have an independent material controlled by that alpha. Rather than having to mess around with the bump and how we're going to mix those together, we can just have our own material just grabbing from that section of the function. We can also take that layer on top, and if we want to add a little bit of turbulence to it, we could go into the material, grass variations, effects, and just set up a little bit of turbulence if you want it so it's not matching it perfectly, or if you want to get rid of those really fine lines. See, now we've got just a little bit of turbulence on there. So the materials themselves still need a little work in order to make it look a little more realistic. For close-ups, we could go one step further and use those crop lines to populate an ecosystem for crops. And you could do that in different sections if you wanted. But I think I'm going to stick with this for now. Change this over to dynamic population and increase the scale back to where we had it, around 15 kilometers. Open that back up, set our scale to 1. Should bring us back to where we were before. And now with dynamic population, when I render this, it'll add in our trees. And we'll go ahead and see how that's going to look. And I think what I'm going to end up doing is changing that procedural terrain because we have all these weird lines in here, and that's caused by the lack of depth on the terrain. We need something smoother, so maybe the Verona is not going to be the best choice in this case. Unless we go in and really keep modifying the material and add additional ecosystems for all the crop rows, which might be a little bit too much. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out. So open the terrain, edit the function. And we could probably just use a Perlin noise gradient. A little larger there. Reduce the roughness. Let's see how that's going to look. Yeah, I think that'll actually work a little bit better. So the material needs a little work for close-ups, but for distant rendering right now, it's looking fairly good. Probably decrease those crop lines a bit, adjust the bump. And if we need to get rid of some of those weird artifacts that are showing up caused by the crop lines, essentially just increasing the anti-aliasing quality for the material and the objects should improve that. Might want to increase the density on the ecosystem. Let's just go ahead and move that up a little. Go into the ecosystem, increase the density. Make sure fast population mode is turned off since we're using dynamic population. And turn down that terrain height a little. And then I'm also going to go in and decrease the size of the crop rows. Go ahead and change that up to 50. Or actually, that needs to go lower, because it is the multiplier, or dividing actually. So we'll bring that to say 4. So now the max would be about 18. And let's take a look at that from up above. Now, one thing I would probably do to make this a little more realistic, a little more interesting, is to get rid of how straight the lines are on the clumps, which would be essentially just using a turbulence to modify that original noise. And then remember that if you do modify that noise, you will need to update it in the other layers that are relying on it for, say, the paths, the roads that are in here. just the separating lines, and then also the ecosystem. But overall, I think it gives you a good idea of some of the things you can do with the function editor for some advanced material editing. It does need a little work to look a little more realistic for close-ups, but I think we'll show you the basic setups that you need, and then you can work from there. But for distant rendering and aerial renders, I think this is pretty good where it's at.